I remember calling my aunt and she was like, giving birth is like walking to China and back from South Africa. And I remember calling my I remember calling my aunt, was like, I've walked to China now. I think I'm back.
Hey everyone, my name is Portia Hadebe and this is Mommy Wellness Club. Thank you for tuning in. And yeah, today we're talking about a very important topic, and I have a mom, a mental wellness coach, and a foodie with me to discuss it. Mmakgabo, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, can you please introduce yourself?
So I am Mmakgabo Dlomo and I'm a mental wellness coach. My background is in mental health, so what I do as a mental wellness coach is I work with people on their mental health journeys to reach their mental health goals. And I'm also an entrepreneur. I've got businesses that I run, and like you said, I'm a mom to two beautiful little toddlers, and a foodie at heart. So that's me in a little nutshell.
In a nutshell. All right, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really means a lot and we appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. You know, mental health is a topic that's been discussed so much, right? But I want us to talk about it pertaining to mothers. But before we get into that, let's just get an idea of what it is.
Your state of wellness is what mental health really encompasses. It refers to how we think, how we feel, how we act, and it affects every area of our life. So whether it be work or your home life, how you parent, relationships. So I think it's a very important distinction to make, to say that mental health is something that we all have. It's something that we have to take care of, like how we have physical health and we have to take care of our physical health. But when we start to get into spaces when we aren't aware of our mental health and we're facing difficulty and challenge, then it can be impacted. And when it is impacted, that's when all these other things can then happen in terms of mental health difficulty.
Do you think that there's a stigma around mental health issues with mothers?
Definitely.
Is it?
Yes, I would say more than 100% yes, right? Because motherhood is always looked at as this phenomenon that has been happening since the dawn of time, right? And it's almost like, so why are you then having a difficult time? You know, like it's women have always done this for centuries, for years and years and years and years. So why are you any different? Right? And I think that's where the stigma then comes in, to sort of say, but I can't speak out, I can't vocalize, I can't ever say anything, right? Because I need to be okay. I need to just take it on because other women have done this before, other women in my family have done this before, my friends, my this, my that. Why is it that I'm not okay? But not knowing that it is not just a struggle for like one person. A lot of women go through this. It's just we don't talk about it.
You have a very interesting story on how you gave birth, right? Do you want to share a bit with us?
So I have two daughters, and my birthing experience for both of them is very different. So with my first daughter, I was in labor for 3 days. And it was very, very intensive. From the moment the contraction started, they were very intense.
So it wasn't like a gradual.
So initially it was like, what's going on here? But within the hour, it was like, really? Full swing, we are now in it. Right? But then when I was going through, so we went to the hospital and everything, and you know, the excitement, I've got my baby bag, and, you know, like, I'm ready.
I know that excitement.
But by the time I hit 3 days, I was like so ready because, you know, I had a birthing plan. I had this, I had that. I had, in my mind, the expectation of how this thing is supposed to go. But the reality of it was so much more different. Exactly. And I think going through that process and having to really come to terms with that whilst all of this stuff is happening was a really, really intensive one for me. It was really hard. It was really difficult. But I think by the time I got to the 3 days, I was like now ready to just be like, you know what, I am now, I can't do this anymore. You know, I remember calling I remember calling my aunt. She was like, "Oh, giving birth is like walking to
this
China."
is happening while you in hospital, like the 3 days you
the
spent
3
in
days
hospital.
I was in hospital.
Yeah.
I remember calling my aunt and she was like, "Giving birth is like walking to China and back from South Africa." And I remember calling my I remember calling my aunt. I was like, "I've walked to China, now. I think I'm back."
And it hasn't happened. Like the baby's not even
the
here.
baby's not here yet. So by the time I got to the 3 days, I think I was fatigued, I was exhausted, but I think mentally I was also not in a great space, right?
Okay.
And then my baby came, and I remember sitting there looking at her and trying to find the feelings, you know, because they're like, "Oh, you know, as soon as your baby is born, you're going to have all of these intense emotions." And I was like, "Okay, it's gonna come. It's going to happen any minute now." And I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And but I just found myself that I really needed to give myself time and space, because at that point I just wanted to break down to be like, "Oh, but there's something wrong with me," right? Because this is not meeting the expectation of the reality that I thought would, all of that stuff, right? So I really needed to give myself space and to really come into terms with what I had been through physically and how exhausted I was. Because I remember it's only when I got home and I had a shower and I had a meal and I was able to sleep. Like, you know, when I handed over my baby to my husband and my mom, and I was like, "I just need to sleep, I need to have a nap." And it's then that process of healing then started to happen. And I was able to then create that space within myself so that I am able to connect with my baby at that point. With our second baby, it was very different. There was a lot more conversation, there was a lot more
experience also.
There was a lot more connection. But I think it was how we were not prepared with the first baby, you know? Like we really didn't know what was coming. And it was just trying to sort of figure out this new reality together that was just, it was a lot at the time. But so we overcame by just finding that connection before it sort of like forced us apart.
Okay. And then how long did it take from that point where obviously you're a mom, you had been through that experience? I mean, the 3-day labor is no joke. I mean, it must have been intense. And trying to build that connection again with your spouse, how long did it take?
So I think for me it took a while, but I think like I sort of, you know, talk about how I needed to sort of say to him, "I am not okay." I think he needed to come to me and say, "Hey, there's something going on here that isn't quite great." And it was when I was like in a better space of receiving that. So I'd say initially not so much, like I wasn't in a space of receiving it necessarily. But I think as time went on, when he then started raising it, because obviously I then know that I want to be in this relationship with my partner, and obviously I want him to be part of the process and connect with me and connect with the baby. That when he started voicing certain things and kind of saying, "Hey, maybe we need to look at this," and I was open to receiving it, it was like, okay, so let's start by looking at it. But I think because we approached it from creating connection and intimacy, it wasn't so much about, "Oh, we need to physically get back into, you know, the swing of things," which I think for women and mothers, you're like, "Guys, can you just please, like, no,
just a break."
Exactly,
for 4 weeks,
right?
for 6 weeks, or maybe
6 months.
Sometimes I was about to say, sometimes even longer.
Exactly. Like just
right? Yeah, no, I can.
But because you've just gone through this thing with your body that is so intensive, but your husband hasn't.
Yeah.
So how do you get into that space where you're able to create that connection with each other? Because I believe that through that intimate connection that we're able to find like our way back to each other, right? So, but sometimes we don't give ourselves enough space, right, to really create that connection.
How do we as moms prioritize self-care? Because there's also that mom guilt.
And mom guilt is a thing.
Okay.
It's a thing, and I think most mothers would definitely be with you on that one. That it's something that we all go through and we experience. I think we need to look at self-care, especially for mothers, from a different perspective, from a different lens. Because often when we think about self-care, we think spa day, retreat, which are great. And yes, please
but
do.
It's not always the case. Yeah.
Please do take care of yourself in that way. But self-care for me, and I always advise my clients to say, self-care needs to come from a place of looking at boundaries of self, right?
Okay.
And what I mean by that is how much of yourself are you willing to give to particular things, to your children, to your relationships, if you're married, to your spouse, to your family, all of that. Like, you have to keep self within self, because it's only when we lose ourselves that we then get into this space of being out of touch with ourselves. And I think when we are in that space of mom guilt, when we are not truly alive to how much of ourselves we really give, then you'll end up getting into spaces where you want to give so much. Even when you have nothing to give, you still feel like, I have to give so much. And then you might end up in spaces where, you know, you are short-tempered with your kids. You are behaving in ways that maybe you wouldn't want to necessarily behave in, but because you are so overwhelmed and you're not giving yourself that space and that time to really connect with yourself.
So as a mom, I believe that we have to be intentional in terms of our parenting. And this is not to say, you know what, we have it all figured out and, you know, everything is smooth, you know, but being intentional in terms of, I think it's the awareness you mentioned, but I know you may use a different phrase, you know, I call it being intentional, you call it.
So we spoke about conscious parenting.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of conscious parenting, because I believe in terms of the parenting models that are out there, it goes a step further.
Okay.
To say you parent from the perspective of how you were parented. Okay. Like, we will always do the things that have been done to us, in the sense that that's the blueprint, that's what you know, right? And so when you parent from a place of consciousness, you are bringing awareness of yourself. So in those moments when your children are acting out and when they're doing certain things, and you know, when you're just looking at them going, oh my goodness, I don't know how to handle this right now, you are being triggered. So you need to figure out, what is that trigger for yourself? Why are you being triggered in the way that you are being triggered right now? I'll give you an example. Like, my daughter is, she's 4 years old, she's turning 5, and she's very vocal. Like, she says so much, to a point where sometimes I'm like, oh my God, how did you get into the space of being so vocal, right? But like, sometimes she's very sensitive in her demeanor and how she approaches things and people and life, and she can be very sort of like, you know, very quick to cry and very quick to be very sensitive in situations. And like, I have my family who'll be like, oh, but like, you know, like, why does she cry so much, and why does she and so I will always ask people, why does her crying affect you? Why does her crying trigger you? Right? Because we grew up at a time where children were meant to be seen and not heard. So if you were crying, it was like, no, you need to stop that.
If there's a mom watching and they're really not coping with the load of being a mom, you know, to a toddler, maybe it could be a mom who has more than one, and it's really overwhelming for them. What practical tips do you have for them?
So one of the very first things I would say to somebody in that kind of situation is to realize that you need to give yourself time. That when we try to be all things and everything to our children, to our, you know, families, and we don't give ourselves time, then the level of overwhelm is only just going to get more and more, and it'll build over time. So you need to give yourself time, but you need to understand for yourself, what does that mean, right?
Okay.
And you can start off quite small and then build it up incrementally over time. So if it means you finding 10 minutes in your day where you are not going to be with your toddler or anybody else, and you put your phone away, and then you just maybe go for a walk outside, or like you are even in your bedroom somewhere, and just give yourself that little bit of time to just check in with yourself when you're not thinking about what are we having for dinner, who's doing what, where do I need to be, and all of that. Just give yourself time to just really connect with yourself, and 10 minutes starting off can really go a long way. Because sometimes we think, oh, I need the whole day.
Yeah.
I need the weekend. And by the time we create the story about what it is that you need, you are never going to get into a space where you actually do any of that, because it's now such a massive task that it just seems like unattainable. And when you start to get into spaces of engaging yourself and engaging those around you to say, I am not okay, then you start to create that space for yourself where you really come to terms with what is happening for you. And I think in terms of seeking out help, there is a number of different ways in which people can seek out help in terms of getting mental health assistance. So you have coaches like myself who work with people, on their mental health journey to try and work with them to discover what their mental health goals are, and how to attain those goals and how to reach those goals.
Okay.
But you also have other professionals, that deal with mental health. So if somebody is dealing with something that's a little bit more intense, that needs more intensive interventions, then you can seek out the help of psychologists and psychiatrists and people in that space, right? To sort of say, what is the kind of help that you need?
I like when you mention the issue of time, that it doesn't have to be 4 hours or days or whatnot, even if it's just that 10 minutes, which is something that I've had to learn myself, because initially I thought, I need like a day or an afternoon, but because now I realize, life is happening now. This is the situation, and I can't always have the break that I need, the ideal break. So taking that short break is very vital. I know it's helped me.
And what might work for you might not necessarily work for me. But I think when we start to have that conversation, when we start to seek out help and sort of do the research and sort of figure it out, then we can start to really get into spaces of figuring out what wellness is for us.
All right, Mmakgabo, I think this will be the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for coming. You've shared so many nuggets. Even for myself, I'm like, like me, I like,
taking notes.
Taking notes.
Yes.
Yeah, making mental notes. So thank you so much. This has been a fruitful conversation, and I hope it's helped anyone who's watching. They've also noted down some nuggets for themselves. And I like how you also brought it down to how we can practically deal with the day-to-day,
Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. Like, we touched on so many things that I think are really important, that we really get into like those conversations about mental health and motherhood. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, but I believe also this is a very heavy and loaded topic, and maybe we'll unpack it as we go, as time comes.
Definitely.
As time comes, If you have any stories that you'd like to share with us, you're a mom, you've gone through something similar to what we've talked about, or even more intensive, please do share with us. I would like to hear from you. Comment, subscribe, like, and we will see you next time. Bye.